Welcome to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner.
And this is Claire Kaplan. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. But before we start, I wanted to remind you that the content of the podcast, even though this is a little bit different, might be stressful or difficult for someone or potentially triggering for a survivor. So please don't hesitate to reach out for support, whether it's from friends or family or even an anonymous hotline. And we also have resource information listed on the Take Back the Night Foundation website.
Thanks so much, Claire. And as we always do, we're going to start out hearing from one of those Dear Katie letter writers who shared their own journey with me as I was traveling and speaking out across the country.
Dear Katie, I remember your story about the college in Connecticut and the one about the 6 guys. And do you know what I felt? Rage. That is my only word to describe my feelings. Blind rage. I'm a big guy, about 6'3", 215 pounds, and all I could think was how I could unleash all of my strength and anger upon just one of these people and take their lives. I have a recurring nightmare where my sister gets raped, and I go out and kill and torture the guy who did it. I know I sound violent and a bit sick, but I'm not. Few people are born violent and twisted. It takes outside conditions, harsh conditions, to drive someone to violence or mental anguish. I am a peaceful person. I love poetry and write every day. Your talk forced me to re-examine the times I may have crossed a boundary in a relationship with a female because of a petty sexual urge. I know I have asked for sex or oral sex from a girl, and if they wanted to, they did. If not, the issue died, didn't it? What about if I asked too much or hooked up with a girl who was drunk and so was I? I can say with a clear conscience that I have always respected a woman's choice to do or not do what she wants. I have never used my strength or intimidation to force a girl into anything. I will take a stand, do something, get involved. Thank you so much for your story, your courage, and your time.
Wow, always so powerful, so powerful. So today we are so thrilled and delighted to have with us Gordon Braxton. I just want to give a small tidbit of information about how Gordon and I met so many years ago. I was seeking out a male voice to co-present with me as I was sharing my story. And I drove to a school and asked Gordon to come and do an interview. And we met there in the parking lot. And I did this quick interview with him and was so incredibly impressed with every answer. He had just graduated from the University of Virginia and had, as far as I knew at that moment, been involved with a group called 1 in 4, which was an organization of men working to end sexual violence and raise awareness and support survivors. He was president of his historically Black fraternity, and he impressed me with, his candor, his openness, his honesty, and his true commitment to wanting to take this journey. I don't think he knew how long the ride might be, literally and figuratively, as we've spent millions, I bet 1 million miles in the car together, driving from campus to campus and audience to audience where we've done our work together. So thank you so much for joining us, Gordon.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing your platform.
Of course. And Claire, I think you also had an interaction with Gordon at University of Virginia.
Well, yes, because I knew Gordon for a while, but he took a course that I taught called Gender Violence and Social Justice. And he stood out among our students. We had several men in the class, but Gordon was one of those guys who just got everything like right away, probably before most of the women did too. So it was he was one of our favorites. I hate to say it, but now I can say it because it's been a long time. I'm happy to know that I had an influence on him and his work with you, Katie.
Absolutely. And as Gordon and I have traveled the country, I'm sure the impetus and ideas behind the book that you are coming out with this year, Gordon, probably started to percolate and evolve as we traveled. I would love to hear your take on how the book came about.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. To be honest, it's probably is a book I started maybe 20 years ago. It was just a project I would put down for periods of time. Honestly, because of a lot of times really doubt, not believing in the project to ever see reality. So I'm really thankful to you, yourself, and to Claire, because you two are two of many voices that encouraged me to share my voice. Um, and then I was finally able to link up with a publisher not too long ago. Um, that's the business side of having a vision. You know, a lot of times we have great ideas, we have great thoughts, we want to put them into print or television or song or whatever. But there's a business side to this, and sometimes you need some help to make that happen. And things finally came together last year for me, and that book should be coming out in January.
So exciting, Gordon. And I think for our listeners, could you just give us, an overview to start with what the book's about?
Yeah, the book is called Empowering Black Boys to Challenge Rape Culture. It's meant primarily as an introductory resource for parents and guardians and mentors of Black boys um, who know that there are conversations to be had with young men, but may not know exactly where to start. They may know there's a problem, but they may not be equipped with the tools to have a conversation with the young men that they know and care about. And this book is meant to be a resource for that population.
And, I guess, can you, how did you organize it? What are some of the themes in the book?
Yeah, sure. I would say it's primarily organized for things I wish I knew when I was growing up. And you all said a little bit of my background up front, but I was well into college before I had a single conversation about this topic, that being sexual violence awareness and prevention. It's not that I didn't have thoughts on it. It's not that I didn't have opinions on it. It's not that I didn't have people in my life that were affected by it. It's just that we don't see this topic as integral to the training of young men. And I was, deep into my college career before anyone ever had a conversation with me. And I think it's gotten better now, but I don't think I'm alone. I think it's pretty common to meet young men who have never really had a space to flesh out their opinions and their perspectives on this topic outside of, maybe their cliched opinions. Obviously, the book is organized around things that I wish I had jumped into at a much earlier stage in my life. Things like such as the ability to challenge manhood. If there's aspects of manhood that you don't like, you can change it.
How can men better challenge aspects of manhood that they might not like? And, what is it that you're hoping that men will step up to and challenge? And is it different for men of color?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I've learned traveling around with you, Katie, and with others is that I feel like men of all backgrounds, they kind of struggle with the same things on this issue. Different communities will articulate it differently. The strategies for talking to particular communities may be different, but by and large, I feel like what I'm talking about is it affects all communities: black, white, rural, urban, poor, rich. Like I said, the communities may articulate these things in different ways, but they're by and large struggling with the same things. And to get back to your initial question, I think the first lesson that I hope young people learn is that manhood is changeable. It's often described as this, this unmovable force of nature. It's something that just is, but that's far from true. Gender constructs are forever moving, forever changing. You don't even have to go back that far in time to see that. And I think the first lesson I hope that all young people learn is that if there's aspects of their training that they don't like, feel free to find out who you are for yourself. And it's kind of unfortunate for me that I didn't really start to delve into this question until I was a little bit older. And I'm so grateful I meet so many young people that are much younger ages that are empowered to ask these questions and decide who it is they want to be, rather than accepting the norms and the standards that society has pushed on them.
In all our journeys, we have heard from so many young people about their vision for change. And when they, kind of uncover some of the misled mantras they've heard over the time, misleading mantras, I think they're willing to challenge them. Either in your opinion or in our experience, what are some of the biggest locations of those mistruths, those misleading, messages about manhood?
I think one of the biggest ones that I focus on is other peers. There are certain, well, when you talk to young men, quite often they will feel that there are certain beliefs and attitudes that they're not at liberty to challenge. And young people actually express fear in challenging, and they don't always necessarily mean physical fear. They usually don't. They just mean fear of social reprisal. It's just not cool to push back against certain thoughts and certain behaviors and certain opinions. They don't want to be that person that's standing out from the crowd. And I certainly don't say this because I think I'm any better than them, because I mean I had to grow into this. It took me a while to get to a place where I was comfortable sitting in a place with my peers and saying, well, this is how I feel about it. It took me a while to get there, and that's why I'm thankful that there are more and more outlets that are challenging young people so that they can start to think about a lot of these things and how they might push back against them at earlier ages. And obviously, the earlier that we can talk to people, the more actual negative events we can probably prevent by having these conversations.
Gordon, do you remember if anyone, when you started working on the cause, you were invited. I always remember you saying, I was invited to this table. Did you have any backlash from anyone in your world for going to the table? Any of your friends, your fraternity brothers, your classmates, your parents, your brothers?
Yeah, for sure. I would say most of it wasn't outright hostility, though. Most of it was just awkwardness. People didn't know quite what to make of me. Once I started sharing my voice. And one thing is I will always share with young men who want to share their voice is, at least in my experience, like even everyone in my life that came to matter, like they came to respect the stand I took. And this includes some friends that were initially provided some pushback. So they had a lot of questions. They couldn't understand why I was doing this, and were vocal about it. But in most cases, in almost all those cases, these folks over time did come back and say, well, I see where you're coming from. So that's something I do hope to give to young men who do want to share their voice. The response may not be immediate. I mean, sometimes it takes time.
I'm curious. I know you were invited to come to a meeting about 1 in 4, and I probably were nominated by someone, an administrator at the university. I'm curious, though. Plenty of people go to those meetings and it doesn't resonate with them. They, go, oh, it's cool, but not for me. They move on and do something else, or they just don't get involved. And plenty of the guys got involved, but didn't stick with it the way you had. And I'm just wondering, what was it? What was it in your life story that resonated for you? Because very few people get involved to the degree that you have.
Absolutely. So I would say that the clearest thing was the bravery and willingness of survivors to share their story with me. So like I said, when I first got invited, I thought that the topic was, I thought it was just a strange thing to talk about. And that's partially because it wasn't personal to me. And after I started sharing my voice, I was fortunate, and I consider myself fortunate that, several women thought enough of me to personalize this issue for me. And they said, hey, that thing you're talking about, it's real. It's real to me. And it took it out of concept, which is where a lot of men talk about it. It's almost like theory and discussion. and personalize it in a way that was absolutely beneficial to me. So I'm forever grateful to all of those women that shared their stories with me. Sometimes sharing your story has that kind of impact on people, and that I was one of those people. The other thing I think that really helped me out was just having a larger social justice framework. I was already very much interested in social justice issues from a perspective of race. And the more I learned, and that was partially, through classes such as yours, Claire, the more I listened to what women had been saying on this topic. I mean, quite frankly, for hundreds of years, if not thousands. The more I listened and I was exposed to those voices, the more it sounded like arguments that I was already familiar with from a racial context. And I think that status quos and power structures have always been adept at minimizing and normalizing violence against certain communities, whether that's violence against a population that we're at war with, or sexual violence against children and women, or state sanctioned violence against Black and Brown people. I think one of the most powerful tools that all of these things have at their disposal is that they have ways of minimizing um, and normalizing the violence. And the longer I stuck around the issue, the more I could see that, and the more I could see actual mechanisms in play. So that's why I got stronger into the movement over time versus fading away. Whereas a lot of people might, and that's what certainly helped me.
Well, that rings true for me and my experience with you in the class as well, but just also in your work, because that's the thing that so many people don't make those connections. I'm wondering if in your conversations with Black and brown men in your work, if you're able to, when you explain it that way, do you see the light bulbs go on, where they go, oh yeah, I see what you're saying, where they kind of see it's just a tool of oppression, like other tools of oppression, in a sense. The violence enforces or reinforces and holds up the status quo. Do they make that connection?
I think it can cut both ways, unfortunately. So I think in a lot of cases it does go that way. The same way it did for me. Like, oh, I see. Yeah, this is something I'm familiar with. But I do think there is also, it can cut another direction too. In that I think sometimes there is a tendency to almost prioritize oppression, so to speak. And you see this playing out on social media all the time. Where maybe one community has an issue that they're concerned about, and there'll be some pushback from another community saying, okay, well that's not as important as this other issue over here. So I do think it has power to divide as well as to unite. For me, I've it's always been a uniter though, because I don't think there's much value in ranking things personally, because I don't think we're ever going to get to a place where we could say we completely eliminated a lot of these issues, right? So to say that we need to get this other thing fixed first before we tackle this other issue, it doesn't make sense to me conceptually, because that's a point we're never going to hit. And by saying that, we're almost effectively saying, well, let's never work on this issue over here. I feel like we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time and make connections and hopefully try to attack many social problems at the same time.
That is the struggle, right? Because every oppressed group has obviously the issues they're dealing with are the primary issues, and they're the ones they're dealing with every day, their lived experience. So sort of say, yeah, we'll take a little time out for this other group, right? It's hard. And it's, helping. I love that you're saying this, because it's like we all have to be working on each other's issues simultaneously. Like Audre Lorde said, that there is no hierarchy of oppression, and there's, or oppressions. And it's hard though when there's so much to deal with. for example, racism. I mean, every day. And to think about, well, am I supposed to pay attention to this other issue? But it is part of racism too. And that's the hard thing for young people to get, I think, that you have to understand the linking of all these things together, because if you can, if you're working on this issue, that's critical. And we can also work on this other issue and we're helping each other out. And it's also affecting you directly.
Gordon, another question I think that comes to mind is, how do you make a pathway to, there'll be critics who say, how do you get to be on this platform? Just like for me, we've always been challenged. What gives you how would you answer those critics? Like, you're not a survivor, you're not a victim, you're a man. How do you answer them? How do you come to the platform? How do you come to have a voice?
Yeah, well, if I understand the question correctly, and let me know if I'm not getting at it, but I will say on the one hand, I don't think there's anything special about me at all, and that's kind of the point. I'm just a average guy that was approached with this topic and decided to lend my voice, and I think there's a lot of other people that would. They just need an invitation. But as far as how maybe I relate to survivors, I know for a fact that I wouldn't be here if survivors hadn't shared their story with me. Um, there's any number of issues in the world because there's any number of problems in the world, and I often ask myself, well, how is it that this issue stuck? In the myriad of great uh, causes that there are to work for. We don't all have infinite energies like yourself, Katie. Most of us have to choose, what we're going to spend our time on. And I think this issue stuck with me, I think, because of survivors. So I know uh, I do want maybe say that to survivors. If those that do share their voices, I want them to know that there is a preventative component to them sharing their voices as well. We often in the field, like, we're generally separated in terms of prevention or response, but I think they're two sides of the same coin. And hearing from survivors, empathizing with survivors, understanding the impact of violence, in turns has a preventative effect as well, because it makes people challenge their own personal behaviors. And just have a hard time seeing a world in which maybe we do really good at prevention, but not so good at response, and vice versa. They're both sides of the same coin, and they both reflect how we feel about respecting the integrity of others and what our values are. So I've always seen response and prevention is related, and I'm thankful to everyone that shared their story with me. And I want those people to know that they have a preventative role to their voice and a preventative impact. And I've always been very thankful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gordon. And I just have one more question. In terms that you've really truly dedicated so much of your life, and most of our listeners may not have sat there with you in so many auditoriums and driven the miles that you've driven to carry your message. But my question is, of all the things you've done, what are some highlights for you as you look back in affecting change?
Well, I'm not sure if anything reminds you that the world can change more so than young people. um, just walk into a high school, a middle school, elementary school, and while you can relate to some things, um, there are always reminders of how much things change and how quickly things change too. Like the things that were of interest to you, it's not of interest to them. In a lot of respects, the things that you spent your time doing, they spend their time doing different things, and they're always just strong reminders of how quickly culture can change to me. But I've always found something hopeful in that, um, and because when we look at a problem like sexual violence, which is probably been with us since humanity first started to organize, um, and we think of it as this fixture in the world that has to always exist, but kids remind you, no, like maybe it doesn't have to.
What is it that you're seeing young people doing that gives you hope?
I think I would say the way that they challenge generations before them. This is not related to sexual violence, but I was actually just talking to a mother who was telling me how um, her son checked her on the way she was referencing a one of her son's friends. One of her son's friends identified as non-binary, and the child was actually educating her on the proper pronouns to use, how to refer to the person, how that person might want to be received. And this was a middle school student talking to his mother. And I know when I was that age, I was certainly not equipped to have that conversation. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most of my peers weren't either, if not all of them. And I think nowadays, I suspect young people are regularly having conversations such as that. And so I think that's, in answering your question, I think I most take away just how often they challenge us. We often think of the education as going in a single direction from adult to young person, but it's a conversation that's going back and forth in my mind when it comes to cultural matters, for sure. So I'd like to think we have an interchange of ideas, and together we're moving forward as a society with us making them better and them making us better. I certainly learned from them, and I hope some of them have learned something from me sharing my voice over the years, for sure.
Well, I have confidence that they have, but I totally hear what you're saying. I see this as well, and it is cause for great hope, I think.
Gordon, as we wrap up our conversation with you, this has been I'm so proud and pleased to have journeyed alongside you. And now that you've written your thoughts down, I think they're going to be heard and read by so many more people who haven't had the chance to meet you in person. What would you say, kind of as we wrap up, where to from here for you? I think your voice is really important. Do you want to keep using it, and any new dimensions and spaces where you haven't gone yet that you're eager to open up another door?
Yeah. Well, this is one of those issues for me. I wouldn't be able to put it down if I wanted to. I'm still going to see and hear things and react to it. It's just a part of who I am at this point. But yeah, this is my first formally published book, and I learned a lot. And one of the biggest things that I learned is that it's just you're just not able to capture everything, right? It's one book is not going to be everything to everybody, and there's always more you're going to want to say. There's always more. There's always better ways to say something, and you just have to hit a point where you put something out for the world. But yeah, I hope that I am able to continue to share my voice on some of the things that I started speaking on in the book, or other topics that I wasn't able to get to altogether. So yeah, I hope it does well enough that I'm able to do that. But if just a few people get something out of it, then it will have been worth it as well.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm sure they will get something out of it.
I know once they start reading, it'll be wonderful to hear their responses as well. So maybe we can chat again with one of your readers and you, and do another podcast about what they learned and what your thoughts are. I think that would be fantastic for our listeners as well. So Gordon, thank you kindly again for spending this time with us and our listeners. And please, for our listeners, please do pick up a copy where books are sold of Gordon's book. You said January, right, Gordon?
Yes, it should come out sometime in January. It's called
Empowering
Black Boys to Challenge Rape Culture. So I just went with the subtitle for the title. So that's how you find it.
Absolutely. So this has been a Dear Katie podcast. Thank you so much, listeners, for joining us. And thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Katie. And also thanks to our listeners for sitting in on this podcast and listening to what Gordon has to share. If you have any questions or need any resources, if you visit takebackthenight.org, you can find those there, which also includes our legal support hotline. And again, as we always say, we're never alone. There are many people walking with all of us in healing and supporting survivors. Gordon is one perfect example of that, and in ending sexual violence.
Together, the Dear Katie podcast, we hope very much to shatter the silence and the violence. Thank you, and we look forward to next week with you.
So long, everyone.